Hello, my name is Emily Hendrickson, and this is my discussion for week 4, comparing and contrasting property terms. So first is real property versus personal property. Real property, also known as real estate, includes land and the buildings or other permanent things put on the land, including fixtures. Examples would be acreage, barn, or a dishwasher. Personal property is anything subject of ownership other than real property, often divided into categories of tangible, which is property that can be touched, and intangible, which is property without substance. Examples would be flat screen TV, a vehicle, and then copyrights. Second, we have a fee simple versus life estate. Fee simple is the largest estate that one can own in land, giving the holder absolute ownership that descends to the owner's heirs on his or her death. It can be sold or granted out by the owner at will during the owner's lifetime. An example would be a couple buys land and builds a house on it to serve as an Airbnb. Upon their death, the land and property will be given to their children. A life estate is an estate limited in duration to either the life of the owner or the life of another person. It may be created by deed, will, or operation of law. For example, a parent gives their home to their children but retains the right to live in it for life. Only after the death of the parent will the children automatically own the estate. Next, we have joint tenancy versus tenancy in common. Joint tenancy is when two or more persons own real property as joint tenants. The estate created is a single estate with multiple ownership. This type of ownership creates a right of survivorship, which means that when one owner dies, the other owner absorbs the deceased owner's interest. For example, if A and B own a house as joint tenants and A dies, B gets sole ownership of the house because of the right of survivorship. Tenancy in common is when two or more persons own real property as tenants in common, and each person owns an undivided share, and on one owner's death, that person's share passes to his or her heirs. For example, if individuals A and B are tenants in common of a home and A dies, A's share does not go to B, rather it goes to the party selected in A's will. Easement versus license. Easement is the grant of a non-possessory property interest that provides the easement holder permission to use another person's land. So an example of this would be a utility company has an easement to install and maintain power lines on your property. License is to real estate conveys no property, right, or interest to the land, but merely allows the licensee to do certain acts that would otherwise be a trespass. So examples of this would be advertisers who place signs on buildings. Deed versus title. A deed is the physical, formal, written instrument used to transfer a title from one person to another. So an example would be a woman physically signs a deed that transfers the ownership of her house to her brother. The title is the aggregate of legal rights enjoyed by a person under law towards the ownership and possession of a property. It simply refers to the concept of legal ownership. For example, a married couple buys a home and the deed is titled in this way. If one spouse dies, the other automatically receives full ownership of the property. A warranty deed is sometimes known as a full covenant, and warranty deed is the most desirable form of deed from the viewpoint of the grantee because it warrants or gives assurances that the title is good. An example would be a man signs a warranty deed that includes the words convey and warrant in the event of his death, listing that his property will go to his son. A quitclaim deed, called a deed without covenants or a fiduciary deed in some states, conveys only the grantor's interest, if any, in the real property and contains no warranties. So an example would be a divorce agreement where one spouse quitclaims their interest in the marital home to the other. Zoning versus eminent domain. Zoning is a legislative act dividing a jurisdiction's land into sections and regulating different land uses in each section in accordance with a zoning ordinance. So there are different zones. Examples would be residential, industrial, commercial, and agricultural. And in those zones, that's the only purpose that a property could have. Eminent domain refers to the power of the government to take private property and convert it into public use, referred to as a taking. So an example would be, in order to build a highway, the government takes and compensates a man for his private property. A regulatory taking is a government regulation that deprives a property owner of the ownership, control, or all economic benefit from a property without divesting the property owner of title. An example is a regulation that prevents a property owner from using their land for any economically viable purpose, such as a ban on building on a beach barrier. Eminent domain refers to the power of the government to take private property and convert it into public use. We referred to this in the last slide. And again, the example would be the government takes away a man's property to build a highway. An encumbrance is a claim against an asset by an entity that is not the owner. Common types of encumbrances against real property include liens, easements, leases, mortgages, or restrictive covenants, which we will get into most of those later. A lien is a security interest or legal right acquired in one's property by a creditor or lien holder. A lien usually prevents sale of the property until the underlying obligation to the creditor is satisfied. For example, a mortgage lien, a lender has a legal claim against your home until the home loan is fully repaid. A mortgage involves the transfer of an interest in land as security for a loan or other obligation. It is the most common method of financing real estate transactions. For example, you buy a $300,000 home with a $30,000 down payment, meaning the remaining $270,000 is from a lender and is meant to be paid back monthly with interest. Your home acts as the collateral for the mortgage. A deed of trust is an instrument that conveys title to a third party, often a title insurance company, called a trustee who holds it as security for the debt. When the debt is paid, title is returned to the borrower. A common example is a real estate deed of trust where a borrower transfers the property's legal title to a trustee to secure a home loan. If the borrower defaults, the trustee can sell the property to pay back the lender. A foreclosure is a catch-all term for the processes used by mortgage holders or mortgagees to take mortgage property from borrowers who default on their mortgages. So, for example, a woman continuously defaults on her mortgage, prompting the mortgage holders or the lenders to foreclose her home. A short sale is a type of sale that avoids foreclosure by selling a home at a value below the loan balance. So, for example, a homeowner who cannot afford his mortgage sells his home for $150,000 rather than the $250,000 that would be needed to repay the home loan. A restrictive covenant is a provision in a real property conveyance that limits the grantee's use of the property. So a common example of a restrictive covenant in real estate is a limitation on the exterior appearance of a home, such as prohibiting certain paint colors or requiring fences to be a specific height or material. And then we've already gone over easement, but it is the grant of a non-possessory property interest that provides the easement holder permission to use another person's land. So a different example would be a neighbor uses your driveway to access their garage. A fixture is a personal property that is permanently attached to real property, and it becomes part of the real property. So for example, this would be like built-in cabinets, light fixtures, ceiling fans, and then plumbing fixtures like sinks and toilets. Trade fixtures are when a business tenant physically attaches personal property, such as machinery, that is necessary to carry on the trade or business to real property. It is called a trade fixture. A restaurant's commercial ovens and shelving, a salon's hair washing stations and salon chairs, and then a gas station's pumps and storage tanks. Those are all examples of trade fixtures. And then lastly, we have a homestead exemption versus the property tax exemption. Homestead allows a homeowner or homeowners to designate a house and land as a homestead, providing it is used by the owner as a home. So example would be families can remain in their homes when tragedy strikes, such as the death of a spouse, and it helps keep those home out of reach of creditors. Property tax exemption is a provision that reduces or eliminates a property owner's obligation to pay real estate or real property taxes. A property tax exemption lowers a property's taxable value from $200,000 to $100,000. So it's always a monetary value. And then these are my references. Thank you.